Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You've got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show. All right, everybody, welcome to the International Teacher Podcast, and I am here with Kent the Cat Guy and JP Mint. How you guys doing tonight?
All right, happy to be here.
Hello, hello, hello.
I would like to pleasantly introduce Pablo Muñoz, and he's coming to us from New Jersey. His background is really superintendent in urban schools. He's here to talk with us about his book, and it's called The Leader's Algorithm. Pablo, welcome to the show.
Woo!
Greg, Kent, and JP, thank you for having me. Yep, I'm in New Jersey, and actually the book was published this July.
This July. Okay, that's fantastic. Better than mine. Mine was a long time ago.
Can I say I hear a hint of the Jersey Shore in your accent when you talk? Is that an accurate?
No, I'm not from the Jersey Shore. I'm from Elizabeth, New Jersey, so the inner city right there at Newark International Airport. So if the Jersey Shore, it might just be a Jersey thing. I don't know.
Okay.
So
I'm waiting for you guys to ask me what exit. So I mean.
Pablo, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey leading up to the book? Of course, we want to hear all about the book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Great. Again, thanks for having me. So I was born, raised, and educated in Elizabeth, New Jersey. For our listeners around the world, that is about 16 miles southwest of New York City. And like I alluded to a second ago, Newark International Airport is partly on Elizabeth grounds. So that's where I was born and educated. But the last 26 years of my life I've spent in a town called Maplewood, and it's not too far from Elizabeth either. It's probably about the same distance to New York. And for those that know New Jersey, Maplewood and South Orange are together as a K-12 school district, but South Orange is where Seton Hall University is. So that gives you some context of where I am living today. My parents immigrated to New Jersey as teenagers from Aguada, Puerto Rico, and ended up getting married, having me and my younger sister Doris. My dad has an 8th grade education, and my mother has a 6th grade education. My dad did most of his work in the restaurant business. So when he came over, he started as a dishwasher. Someone saw promise in him, helped him become a cook. And through the later years of his life, he was the head cook of 2 very large banquet halls, serving thousands of people at luncheons and dinners. It was quite an operation. My mom started working in factories as a factory worker, but eventually transitioned and she became a seamstress. So both of them, for most of their life, definitely my mom, were in low-paid jobs. I lived in a house with my maternal grandmother and mom, dad, and my sister, my aunt, Lydia, and my 3 cousins. And my father's one of 15, and my mom is one of 5. So I have a whole lot of cousins. I think by our last count recently, mom and dad and I have about 70 first cousins. So by that nature, actually, like my circle of friends really was my family, because we spent most of the time traveling between each other's homes and going to the park together.
And Pablo, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it the same as in Mexican culture here, where your nephews and nieces, or your parents' nephews and nieces end up being kind of like your cousins as well? You call them prima or primo, and you're because they're all similar ages.
Potentially, if I were living in Puerto Rico, but since most of my family was in New Jersey and I had some family in New York City, it was really my mom and dad's brothers and sisters, and it was like first cousins. Yeah, we did actually visit some of my mom's cousins that were in the area. So I did have like second generation cousins they were my age. So I thought they were my first cousins, but they weren't actually that. Yeah. So there was that connection. I did remember that. Yeah, that's very true. There is some of that, but mostly first cousins, direct first cousins. Um, I graduated from Elizabeth High School. Most of my life, I played baseball from Little League all the way to college. I got my undergraduate degree at Yale University in psychology. When I was there, I participated in its teacher preparation program. So I student taught at Wilbur-Cross High School in New Haven, Connecticut. And when I was student teaching, I also volunteered as a baseball coach for the high school. When I became a full-time teacher, was a baseball coach. So I've coached baseball at all levels, starting at the level of Little League all the way to professional. So I used to coach my daughters in baseball. And then I ended up being a pitching coach with the Chicago Cubs minor league system. So I've coached at all different levels. I got my master's degree in educational administration from Teachers College, Columbia University. I did most of my career in my hometown of Elizabeth, in the Elizabeth Public Schools. So I started there as a teacher of social studies. I was then supervisor of social studies, director of curriculum instruction, assistant superintendent. Then I became superintendent of schools in 2005. I did that for about 8.5 years. And then I transitioned to another city school in New Jersey called Passaic. I did that for about 7.5 years. And then I retired. And immediately I started my educational leadership consulting company. I became an adjunct professor at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. And then I started writing my book. And so now I'm an author. And I'll finish my little story here by saying that I am most proud of my two daughters. Cecilia is 22. She just graduated in June from MIT, and she started working last week at the Boston Consulting Group. So she's laying roots down in Boston. And then my youngest daughter just started her first year at Northeastern, although interesting enough, her first year is completely on the Northeastern campus in London. So she's doing some international study right now. But that kind of brings you up to where I came from, what I did, and what I'm doing now.
If I may, Pablo, you make it sound this journey into education, you make it sound so natural that it was, something that you knew you wanted to do the whole time. When did the teaching bug strike you?
Interesting enough, it wasn't that natural. The bug was planted in, I still remember the moment. I was sitting in the back of my calculus class, senior year, and I said to myself, there's got to be a better way. That was the one moment in time that I remember, like, I wanted to become a teacher. But when I went to college and I applied to different university, my intent was to be an engineer. My desire was to be a civil engineer. And actually, it ended up full circle later when I started building schools as a superintendent. I ended up having a lot of fun because that was where I wanted to be, kind of civil engineering and architecture. So when I went to college, it was for that. But interesting enough, as things play out, the university I chose to go to did not offer civil engineering. So Yale did not offer civil engineering. At the time, I think they only offered 3. So I chose to go after mechanical engineering and did not like that. So eventually I transitioned to psychology. I wasn't completely sure what I was going to do. And what ended up happening is one of my first mentors, actually he started off as an advocate, then as a mentor, was a gentleman named Herb Hennessy. And Herb was the supervisor of social studies for the New Haven Public Schools. And he was this really jolly, fun guy. And I would see him often because at Yale, the way they divide up the students after their freshman year was that you lived in what they called residential colleges. And he would come definitely at lunch. I'm not sure at dinner. And you just walk around and sit down with people. And this particular day, he chose me, and I happened to be myself. And he asked me if he could sit. And I said, sure, go right ahead. And his first question is, what are you going to do with your life? That was my junior year.
Well,
I think
He was
he's
concerned.
I think he's actually trying to recruit Yale to become teachers, and that's what he ended up doing for me. So he sat down. I told him what I was majoring in. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. It was a fall of my junior year, so I started the program a semester late. But since I was in psychology, I had a lot of the prerequisite classes already built in, so I was able to catch up pretty quickly. And he said to me, "Have you ever thought about being a teacher?" And then I said, yes. And I told him about the calculus.
In calculus class once, yeah.
And then he said, well, okay, if you're interested, I'll introduce you to the person running. And then this is my next advocate, my next mentor, Edie McMullen. And she was the wife of the head of college there who handled the social life. So the transition in the conversation, I didn't have to go very far. I was right in the same building. And we sat down, we looked over my transcript of classes. She told me I had to do all this, take all these classes to get certified as a teacher of social studies in Connecticut. And that's how I became a teacher. So it wasn't my intent when I went to college, but ultimately it became my passion. I ended up doing the right thing. I loved it. Now I'm really loving it because I'm doing it again after retiring and not being a school administrator. Now I'm teaching at the college level, and I just leave the classroom all jazzed up after I teach.
Let's get to talk a little bit about your book. And what I noticed from what you've just shared with our audience, there was a quote in here. You were talking about one of these professionals or one of the teachers or leaders in a school that you had met, and you mentioned he was invested in perpetuating a system that was just sort of functional, nothing more. That's a quote directly from your book. And it reminds me of your comment about sitting in calculus. You know, you're looking up at this calculus guy and you're just like, this is sort of boring. There's got to be another way to do it. And then another thing leading into your book is you said you have to dream big. When you dream big, you inspire bold action. And I thought I'd give you an opportunity to explain the title to get us started a little bit.
Yeah, so The Leader's Algorithm is the title of the book. The book is essentially about educational leadership. Although when you get into the leader's algorithm and you get into the personal theory of action, it's actually applicable to any leader of any type of organization. So why did I end up writing this book? In one word, it was help. I wrote it to help aspiring and new and current administrators. There was two ways when I was writing this book that I thought I could help. The vision for the book was to share what I learned in my 30-year journey in public education. 16 years of that as a superintendent of schools. I wanted to share what I learned from my advocates and my mentors. I also wanted to share what I learned from the Broad Academy. And I also wanted to share what I learned from my book mentors, the books and the case studies I read about leadership and management and teaching and learning by authors that I mostly never met. And the second way I was hoping to help is that I hope aspiring and new and current school administrators will pick up the book, read it, and then use it to create their leadership framework and strategy to lead and manage their school district. That kind of gives you an overview of why I wrote the book and what was in it. But let's get into the leader's algorithm, and then I'll get into personal theory of action, and then I'll move back to your questions. It's the title of the book, but it's actually part of chapter 1. And so the question is, what is the leader's algorithm? And so the leader's algorithm is a simple equation that puts strategic thinking to work. You write and share a personal theory of action. Then you don't keep it a theory. You actually execute that personal theory of action consistently, and you reflect over and over again on your execution. And then you do that with public accountability.
Could you give us an example? Our listeners might really be able to use an example of a theory in action. If you could give us one.
These are three major strategic actions that I personally do, right? There's a lot of things I do, but if I needed to focus on three things, and this is what I did in both school districts, it was this. If I lead with a focus on three items, keep the school system focused on its vision and mission in an effort to produce excellent results. Number two, select effective leaders to carry out the mission. And number three, get the resources into the classroom. So that ends up being the first if statement. There's three others, but that kind of gives you a broad sense of strategic actions that I would take. Broad actions. Obviously, you end up going deeper and having more specific action plans and tactical plans, and depending on what you're working on. As a leader, those were the three major things that were always top of mind when I was designing programs and services and building budgets and hiring personnel. Those are the things that kind of drove my personal actions.
If there was a constant execution of those if statements and the others, and you had public accountability, then you were able to not just be a leader that's making everybody change. You're going to get the buy-in from everybody and transform where you are, right?
Those three things, right? The personal theory of action plus execution plus accountability equals transformation. Then you can transform your life, your work, your schools, your school districts, and your relationships. And then hence, that is essentially the first algorithm that's in the book, is that equation. The second algorithm that's in the book is the personal theory of action. And it's the heart and soul of the leader's algorithm. Everything that flows through the book and flows through my two leadership experiences in Elizabeth and Passaic were driven by my personal theory of action, which was my basic definition of how I was going to lead the organization. So, what is a personal theory of action? I started touching on it before based on JP's question. A personal theory of action is a hypothesis, and it's what you can personally do and what you can do through your team to achieve your goals. It's written in a logical chain of if-then statements that lead you to your ultimate goal. Said a different way, and here's the algorithm. If we do A, B, and C, then we will get X, Y, and Z results. And like I've said, I use my personal theory of action as my leadership framework.
Pablo, let me ask you this question. Let's say maybe I'm that calculus teacher that wasn't doing a great job, that just didn't have the formula to connect with you as a student. Let's say you're sort of in charge, you have all your ideas about the leadership algorithm. How do you filter down to me and help me become a better teacher? Is it as simple as if I can't get on board, I should step aside? Or is there a way that I could transform my practice if I'm that teacher that's not really succeeding?
Right. Well, as a superintendent of schools, you tend to be further and further away from the classroom, depending on the scale of your school, right? If you're
Yeah.
the chancellor, as they call it in New York City, you have 1 million students.
That's the numbers that we're talking about. So you as a superintendent
You
could
could,
have
if
that
you were running New
big
York City and
of
some
a
most of the
cohort.
big school districts in
Yeah.
the United States, a few 100,000, or New Jersey loves its school districts, so we have like 600 of them, and you can be a principal and the chief school administrator, which is what they call it, of one school. Really, to your question, is what I start to think about the organization and the if statement. If I move the district towards an aligned instructional system, and then there are seven elements of strategy. The first is create and implement aligned, coherent, and detailed curriculum. The second is develop effective teachers and leaders driven by a culture of high performance. Third is provide a comprehensive professional development system. Fourth is set clear standards and measure progress through formative and summative assessments. The fifth is build a comprehensive student information system. Sixth one is establish interventions for students, teachers, administrators, and schools. And the last one, the seventh, is measure performance, progress, and growth. So this part of my personal theory of action speaks to the organization, speaks to what I would be doing for teachers. And quite frankly, what I end up doing is this particular piece gets written. I've drafted in both districts board policy of an organizational theory of action. So this statement that I just stated is written out over a few pages defining strategic actions that I must take with my team. I have the board adopt it, and therefore they're setting policy, although I drafted it for them. And then to your question, and that calculus teacher, we would be looking very hard at what's being taught. Is it rigorous? Is it preparing kids for college? Is it advanced placement level content? And then, depending on the quality of that teaching, right, they would be getting feedback through evaluations. And we would be spending a lot of the district's money sending these staff members to AP conferences to continue to improve their skills. But we would also have a really comprehensive professional development system in the district that deals with content and pedagogy. That's how, as a superintendent, having a written personal theory of action. And that's what's critical in this, right? And as you read through the book, one of the critical elements is you need to write it down. And then you need to share it. You can't keep it a secret. And you need to write it down because, public schools, they sit in the center of politics, and the world gets noisy and you get pulled in many different directions. And your personal theory of action, you can go back to. It's your true north. It centers you. When you get pulled in different directions, you can always go back and say, okay, this is what I stand for. These are the values. These are my beliefs. But it's not written in stone. So as life goes on, as you continue to read and be influenced and learn more, you modify. And when you read the book and you go to Appendix A, you can read my complete personal theory of action in Elizabeth and Passaic. I made a major shift and change on my fourth if statement. And the fourth if statement is about creating guiding principles. So I made a completely different guiding principles in Passaic, and that was really contextual to what was happening in Passaic, that I needed to make that change. So you need to write it down, but you also have to be willing to modify based on what you learn and based on.
I also noticed, Pablo, that you mentioned that not only is it written down, but it sort of becomes this, you're this beacon, you're speaking it, you're having your team talking about it, they're mentioning it, they know it by heart. They know, even in its transformation, that you just say it until it gets ingrained in your team, and they filter that down.
No. Yeah, it's like I say, you keep on talking about it until they gag on it. You can't repeat it enough. I mean, making transformative change in urban centers is hard work. You have to get beyond the low expectations. And you do that largely by changing behavior and putting people through your systems and structures that you put in place. It's long, hard work. And one of the elements as a leader is being very clear what you stand for and articulating it at all times in different ways, right? I would tell new administrators or the ones that were getting promoted, you need to write about it, you need to talk about it, and most importantly, you need to show it through your actions. And quite frankly, all three of them have to be aligned. Because if your actions are different than what you're writing and saying, people are going to, first of all, call you out and say, well, you're not following what you're saying.
Well, that goes down to good teaching too. Good teachers do the same thing. We model for our kids. We're always on stage, right? JP, right, Kent? We're always on stage. And when I go in and see Kent teaching, he's on stage and he's modeling for his kids. And our principal is modeling for us. He's modeling for our associate principals and our superintendent, who, by the way, we see much more often than a superintendent in the States you might see. All right. They're very much a part of our family, our school system in most cases across the world. The superintendent's part of it, like right there. And they have to model it for us. And I think that that's what I like about your book is it's not just geared towards great leaders. It's geared, even if you dig down deep, it just speaks out to a teacher because the students are watching us. And if we don't give high expectations, which is another theme that goes throughout your book, don't give them short, low expectations. You need to have high expectations and they will meet those expectations. If you set low expectations and just sort of work the line, they'll meet those maybe. But if you set them really high and believe in them, then they'll do it. So it sounds like you're doing it from a leadership point of view from this book, but as a teacher, which I'll never be an admin, but from as a teacher reading this book, I get that.
Yeah, listen, yes. I mean,
I see that parallel.
If you were to fast forward to chapter 8, which is leading with love, I write a very personal theory of action, which is my theory of action that I wrote now that I've transitioned to a different part of my life. And it's my guiding framework for how I want to live the rest of my life. So, yes.
Leading with love.
Yeah, it's in that chapter. And to your point, you don't need to have an administrative title to write a personal theory of action, right? I'm telling you, I have one. I'm no longer a superintendent. I have one for my personal life, right? So anyone can write a personal theory of action. It's really laying out how you want to act and behave and what you value to get to that ultimate goal, whatever you declare it to be. And in your personal life, it may be one thing. In my professional life, it was largely focused on creating outstanding school systems and moving them from low performing to higher performing over time.
All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all four of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITP Expats. That's with an S. ITP Expats is our handle.
All right, and thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners, and though we're not monetized, we are here for you, and we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show.
Let me remind our listeners, we're talking to Pablo Muñoz, and his book is The Leadership Algorithm. It's available www.amazon.com. or wherever you buy your finer books. Is this an
it is in the
well,
ebook.
Mr. Muñoz?
The Leader's Algorithm is an ebook, paperback, and hardcover. Yeah, and you can get it wherever books are sold.
Okay, The Leader's Algorithm. Okay, Greg, let's hear from the book.
Pablo mentioned just a little bit ago that on page 8, he goes really into a personalized version of his algorithm. To quote you, you said, if I commit to these guiding principles, and you were talking about the principles before, if I care about others, be honest, love my family, respect humanity, be humble, then I will have a life of significance, success, love, and joy. That's not a superintendent talking. That is a good person talking right there, a quality person that you have grown up. I mean, my little boy's grown up. No, Pablo, I'm amazed. I that really hit me, and I did read chapter 8 because it hit me personally. That's what made me make the connection with you above the superintendent, above the teaching stuff in the middle of the book and the leadership things that you mentioned. I really personally grabbed onto that.
No, you're getting ready to make me cry. I mean, when I wrote chapter 7, which is leading with resilience, and chapter 8, leading with love, it's very raw, it's very vulnerable. And the reason I wrote both of them is that I really wanted people to connect their personal lives, because being a leader, whether it's you have the title or not, people go through stressors in life. And those two chapters really get into really personal things that happened to me I cried right through those two chapters, and they were hard, but they're written ultimately to help the reader, especially one that may be going through the same things that I went.
You're pouring out your heart. That's what it is. You're pouring out your heart in those chapters.
Pablo, correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds like a book. I mean, you have 25 years in education, 8.5 years as a superintendent. It sounds like this is a book that's probably not going to be written by a 25-year-old Pablo Muñoz. This sounds like a culmination of your journey in education.
It is, and like Greg says, chapter 8, Leading with Love, was written in the end of 2021, early 2022. And when I retired, that chapter would not have turned out the way it turned out because, quite frankly, it's in the book. So I'm getting divorced. I'm going through a divorce. I'm still 2 years in the process. And I talk about leading with love in there and, how to lead heartfelt. And I talk about a moment in time where I used pain to help educate my daughters and to model effective leadership, what I learned from my mom and grandmother. That's not the only story in that chapter, but that is one of the stories. And so yes, this book would not have been written 25 years ago, and it actually was still being written as I was writing it. There were still stories that were unfolding that I wouldn't have predicted at the start of writing the book.
Can I make a connection here with our show? I mean, a deep connection with our show here. Pablo, one of the things that international teachers, whether they're married, single, or with family, and Kent and JP will agree with me on this one of the keystone things that you go through when you live in another country and you're away from your comfort zone is you have a lot of time for introspection. Am I going to make it through this? Who am I? What makes me tick? And it resonates a lot with me with this book because it makes me want to be a better person, a better professional. And that algorithm works. It does work, especially with chapter 8, where it hits on the personal, where you sit back and say, I need to do this. You have chapter 1, 5, and 6. You have little assignments for each of the readers. You invite us to be introspective and think about ourselves. And then at the end of the book, you even say, let's do this together. Let's transform education together. You're asking for more and more people to sign in and share their ideas with you. As an international teacher, I need that time to think to myself and say, here's a framework I can use to really define it. It's a tough one. How do you define yourself? How do you define your education? How do you find like your personality and your loves and what makes you tick? So that's my comment. I just thought I'd throw at you there. Kent, you agree? You got time?
Well, listen, Paul, you can respond to that, Pablo. Also, along the way, if you were going to pick up a couple of education books to read or reread, I was hoping you would just say a few words about what some of those books might be.
I'm a much more practical guy. So I love all the leadership writing of John Maxwell. So he's a big hero.
He's the guy who wrote the book about the cheese and stuff like that. Is that right?
No. That's somebody else. That's the cat guy thinking about cheese here. I think I don't know what's going on there. John Maxwell's probably most famous book is the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. Let me jump over to the instructional side. The instructional side, because it was an important part in my development as a superintendent, because this is when it was published, and I discovered it through a group I was working with, is Instructional Rounds in Education by Liz City and Richard Elmore et al. That is a critical book that all should read. Even if you don't do instructional rounds, the importance of the instructional core, the core of the work that we did in both of my school districts, it really helped me get around that question of what you should be doing, because everything, right? All the noise, everything that surrounds the classroom is the instructional course, the relationship between the teacher, the student, and the content, right? And one of the most important pieces out of that I used to talk about all the time that comes from that book is that task predicts performance. Task predicts performance. I would repeat that all the time. And it was really about getting cognitively challenging tasks in front of students. And in my case, it was urban centers with low expectations trying to move into high expectations. And we had to do a lot of curriculum and policy work and relationships with colleges to make some of that stuff happen over time. The other work is John Hattie's work. I think that's his meta-analysis. I think he just came out with a new book. That is really critical because a lot of people have their beliefs about what works and what doesn't work, and Hattie kind of lays out the different strategies that actually do work and actually breaks some of the myths of things that people say are the reasons why kids can't learn. If you had 2 instructional books to read, those would be it. If you had to pick a leadership book, non-John Maxwell, one of my favorites is Lincoln on Leadership by Donald Phillips. That's an excellent book. True North, the author is escaping me, but that book is probably the first book that I read. It's about authentic leadership. Got into the kind of the emotional stressors that leaders go through. Circling back to my book, I really wanted my book to be different, right? I talk about my failures and my successes. Lay out a personal theory of action. I open up about anxiety and depressions and being resilient and giving strategies like that. So I really wanted the book to be real. People really go through. I didn't want it to be a book like, oh, look what I did, look how great it is. And it laid out what a leader's algorithm is, and it wants you to go create one. The book lays out a lot of leadership principles that I think are valuable. And then I tell a lot of personal and professional stories to kind of amplify those principles.
So, Pablo, switching gears, I wonder if you could tell our listeners about any of your international travels, if you've been overseas, and what were some of the impressions you got. If you saw some interesting educational systems, if you got firsthand at any of those.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much a homebody, and my wife is the traveler. So I got dragged to a lot of different places across the world. Most oftentimes it was a beach. So most trips did not really get us into classrooms or schools. The biggest educational international experience was I was awarded in 1997 Fulbright Memorial Fund teacher program. There were lots of us. And we traveled to Japan. I think we spent about 2 weeks there. And the main purpose for the people that received the award was to go look and study the Japanese education system and also culture and family. When I was there, we got to visit elementary schools, high schools. We got to visit the private tutoring schools that a lot of the students were doing at night. We also got to live with a Japanese family. We were embedded in a Japanese family and, eat and go through the whole bathing process that they have. They have a pretty unique one there.
Sleeping on the floor? Did you sleep on those mats?
No, but I did get housed in this apartment that was like micro. And to get into the bathroom, I think the bathroom's width was basically the width of my body. So to get in there to shower and to do other things, it was like
an airline.
Like tight. It's like, God, oh my God, this is so tiny.
I don't think Greg and I would fit in that bathroom.
I don't think so either.
That was wild. That was a wild hotel.
Well, there goes our big travel plans. Hey, Pablo, what's sorry to cut you off like that. I bet our listeners would love to hear this. What's one thing about the Japanese school system that you think to yourself, man, I really wish that was part of the U.S. school system? And what might be one thing where you think, that probably wouldn't succeed in the U.S.? What are these two things for you?
Oh, God. I'm going to answer that a little bit differently. Let me just give you my observation of that experience as I remember it. We're talking many years ago, right?
100 years ago, right?
I remember, regardless of what setting it was, quiet. And I don't know if that necessarily means focus, but whatever setting, whether it was an elementary classroom or a high school classroom or the night school tutoring places, quiet, right? And if you go to an urban school district, I mean, there's noise.
Or
all
Kent's
over the
classroom.
place.
Yeah.
Kent's classroom.
I'm half Japanese, but not the quiet part.
The other observation was the amount of hours students spent in school, broad school, right? They actually were in schools that were known as schools, but then as they got closer, definitely to thinking about getting and applying to a college, lots and lots of kids were going to these private tutorial schools at night. So they were spending hours studying. And that was eye-opening and very unique. Something that, breaks the myth of the United States is that they have very large class sizes. Another thing, not really into sports, in the athletics, physical education. I don't know if it's changed in the years, but at the time, I'm going in there, once physical ed, do you ever wear your athletic teams? No, it's learning, preparing, studying, and those are kind of big takeaways. Another one, and I'll leave you, this is the last one that was very interesting. Elementary school, I believe they asked us to take off our shoes. And I think they may have given us some slip-ons. And no custodians because the students cleaned and swept. They kept the building clean. So that was like, whoa.
Wow.
That was new. The unions in the United States would not allow that to happen. Or even probably the parents, right? Probably even the parents wouldn't want their kids sweeping. But it was, I guess, part of their culture, part of the value system of
I
what
was
they're
going to
teaching.
ask you about that if you had witnessed that, because I had witnessed that in Asia as well, in South Korea, that there was the cleaning hour. And I mean, right down to scrubbing toilets, emptying out the garbage cans. What I found that helped with students was that they took an ownership in the cleanliness of their schools and a pride in their school. I mean, I don't know how much that could, as you say, transfer into the US or into Canada, but kids really considered a lot more about throwing something on the floor if they were going to have to clean it later. So it was one of those things where it fixed a lot of the problems that maybe some of our schools have with vandalism or, gum under the chairs.
Or at least hitting the water in the toilet. That would help a little bit.
Oh, boy. True, our bathrooms are terrible at
Of
school.
course, that's what my wife tells me too. So we're good. Sorry, Pablo.
No, that's fine. I'm enjoying it.
Pablo, in your travels, do you have any kind of a police story or custom story that you'd be willing to share? Now that you're not in charge of all these superintendent schools, you're now retired and you're footloose and fancy free. You don't have to be too specific, but anything fun to share?
Well, I'm more loose these days. I remember when I was a public employee and I wouldn't do certain things, and my wife would say, "Why won't you do it?" Because I could be in the
Public
newspaper
eye,
tomorrow,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I was in LA once on vacation, and somebody called out my name. It was at a basketball game at the top floor. It's like, I can't even go anywhere, and someone doesn't know me. But the story that I remember is, and this happened a few times, depending on where, it didn't matter where I was coming from. And I think it was Newark Airport. I don't know if it was JFK as well, but upon entry, my wife and my two daughters got through, but I got detained. For a while, I got taken to wherever they detained
The little
people.
room,
That
yeah.
The
separate
back room.
Yep. We all know that little room, don't we?
And a few times they were long. There was one time it was really long. And so my wife and my two kids, they got the luggage. They're waiting outside, and my kids are young. They're not the women they are now. It's like, what happened to Dad? Is he? Are they going to release Dad? What did he do? So then it's funny, but it's also a little bit sad, right? Why did I get detained? Because of my name, Pablo Muñoz, apparently is a very popular name outside of the United States and Central South America, and maybe there have been Pablo Muñozes that have done things that shouldn't be entering the country. But this particular Pablo Muñoz got caught up in that. And I remember them questioning me afterwards, looking at my passport and my driver's license. Where'd you live? Where'd you grow up? And that. But that's why I got detained, because my name was Pablo Muñoz.
Coming back into the
It was a good
States.
thing you didn't get on a no-fly zone.
It's like JP. You should say, well, they didn't pick up on your New Jersey accent. I mean, what happened there?
That's right. They were
That's
suspicious
why
that
they
you were from
detained you in New
Jersey.
York, because you're from Jersey. That's what it was.
That's what you were detained.
I always thought it was Pablo, but it was the New Jersey connection, right?
It's the New Jersey connection, according to Law and Order, at least.
Okay, JP, would you plan the next apology letter? Dear New Jersey, we're very sorry we made fun of you on the air again. Oh boy, this has been a lot of fun. Pablo, we want to get your book on the nightstand or in the hands of all the teachers that we can. What do you want to tell those teachers about anything else in that book that you haven't had a chance to tell us about that is just going to pique their interest?
Very interesting. Early on, Greg was touching on vision and mission. There are actually a bunch of real life stories, professional stories in there that are very interesting. Like I talked earlier, the chapter on resilience is an important chapter for all people. Yeah, I won't go into all the other ones. That's actually the most important thing. I chose to write in that chapter about my anxiety and depression and a job-related situation in Elizabeth that ultimately got me so depressed that I had to check myself into the hospital. And I came out much better. They gave me the medicine. I've been in psychotherapy. So it was like the best experience, right? So I wanted to do my part in this book to break down the taboo and the shame about mental illness. The seed of that started in intensive outpatient care. So right after the hospitalization, you go to intensive outpatient, and then you go to outpatient. And they showed us a video of an interview of a husband and wife. The husband was suffering from depression, and I think he had written a book, and they asked him, why did you write the book? And why are you on the show, and why are you willing to talk about it? That's why he wanted to at least contribute, right? I mean, you break an arm, an organ's not operating, you have a physical illness. People say, oh my God, the empathy, sympathy, feel better. You tell them you have a mental illness, you don't get that same reaction. So I wanted to do my part in breaking down the taboo and the shame that comes with mental illness. So I disclose it. I'm very upfront about it. I'm talking about it with you. I've talked about it with other people. What happened that nice, right? Because things, they happen in coincidences, right? As I was writing that chapter, the United States ended up creating a 988 hotline number and a website, the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline, where you can text or you can go online and chat and have resources, and you can get to talk to someone when you're in crisis. So I put that into the book. As I was writing the book, there was a process. It was my first book, so I was learning from the publisher and my team every step of the process. But there was a part towards the end where we had beta readers, and a few of the beta readers came back and said to me, you might save a life with this book. Like I said in the beginning, I wanted to write this book to help, right? I wanted to share what I learned and give people an opportunity to set up a structure, right? To take mental models in their head, to take the things they read, their experiences, what people are whispering into your ear, and to kind of formulate yourself, right? My personal theory of action fits on an 8 by half 11 sheet of paper, one side, right? And it clearly guides the way I operate. But I also wanted to be able to help in many ways. And in this particular chapter, I wanted to help by giving the information and access for people that find themselves in that moment and feel like there's no one there to help them. That it's okay to go get help. Quite frankly, I say in the book, get the help before you get to me. I actually wrote, the experience broke me.
It broke me before you're broken.
Right? It broke me. It set me there, and I want people not to get to that. So my hope is, outside of all the leadership and the education stuff, that if for no other reason, pick it up, because you might learn a couple of things about falling down and getting back up, falling down, getting back up, being resilient, And if you really get to the point where you are in real deep crisis, thinking about bad things to yourself, there are people out there that want to help you. And I put that in.
One other thing that I noticed is a theme throughout our discussion and throughout your book after reading it is family is first. You said you would walk through fire for your family. You share stories about what you've done with your daughters and things that you've gone through you didn't necessarily want to do, but you've done it for them. There's family and there's friends, but then again, family is really first. And I thought that was powerful. We can tell that from talking with you too. So that's inspirational. And there's so many different angles to this book, and it's wrapped up in a leadership kind of title.
Pablo, is there social media that you want to tell our listeners about? Are you on social media?
You can find out about Muñoz and Company, my educational leadership consulting company, on the website, www.themuñozcompany.com. There you'll find my telephone number. My email address is pablo@themuñozcompany.com. Also, you'll be able to see the services I provide. There's some information on the book that'll take you to Amazon directly. And I'm also on LinkedIn as Pablo Muñoz, so you can see what I've done throughout my career and what I'm doing today. So those are kind of the most prominent places that I'm at. Located.
Be sure to check out Pablo Muñoz at all his social media, as well as find his book, The Leader's Algorithm, available at www.amazon.com or wherever you buy your finer books. I would also like to thank JP Mint. You can find JP Mint at jpmintconsulting.com. I'd also like to thank Greg, the single guy. You can find him in room 107 next to the drinking fountain. And I am Kent, the cat guy, thanking you once again for joining us. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll stay on for just a little bit
all
here.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, Pablo.